Hello space fans, welcome to Space Command, your source for space news. My name's Brian and I want to thank you for joining us in this new year. Happy New Year! It's 2020 and we've got some very exciting events that are coming up here in January as far as space goes, with Spacex launching a Starlink mission here in just a few days, and then the upcoming in-flight abort test by Spacex on January 11th, so that's pretty exciting. So we're going to cover lots of different issues and events that are coming up here in 2020. First, I do want to mention it's been 3,086 days since the United States has had the ability to launch astronauts from American soil to space. The last time we were able to do that was in 2011 with the Space Shuttle Atlantis, and with its landing and then being retired and now on display at the Kennedy Space Center. So if you're in that area, make sure you stop by and take a tour of the Kennedy Space Center and see the Space Shuttle Atlantis. Well, let's see here. A little bit of space weather for you. Right now, the moon is in its waxing phase, and coming up January 3rd and 4th is the Quadrantids meteor shower, and this could be one of the most amazing shooting star events of the year with its display of bright fireball meteors. More than 100 shooting stars should be visible per hour. However, the event is a short window of only a few hours each night. The Quadrantids are a notable event because, unlike most meteor showers, which originate from comets, the Quadrantids originate from an asteroid called 2003 EH1. Well, some Mars weather. Today, the date on Mars is Sol 2619. The high temperature on Mars is -5 degrees Fahrenheit. The low temperature, -106 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind speed is 4 miles per hour from the east. The UV radiation index is high radiation. High radiation, so that's not good. The sunrise was at 5:42 this morning, and the sun's going to set at 5:28 this evening. So the first bit of space news that I'd like to cover with you is that NASA has announced that the first NASA astronaut candidates to graduate under the Artemis program will be honored January 10th at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. The basic astronaut training has lasted more than 2 years. The class includes 11 NASA candidates and 2 Canadian Space Agency candidates. The 11 NASA candidates were chosen from more than 18,000 applicants. Well, I'll tell you what, if you were curious on what it takes to be an astronaut, I think you're going to be surprised here to see that the credentials are just incredibly high as far as some of these candidates have completed in their lives to be able to be prospects for NASA astronauts. So let's just take a look at some of these. From Richland, Washington, Kayla Barron is a U.S. Navy lieutenant. She graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy. She has a master's in nuclear engineering from the University of Cambridge in the UK. She also is a systems engineering major, and so that's pretty awesome. Then there's Zeena Cartman from Williamsburg, Virginia. She has a master's degree in marine science, and that's from the University of North Carolina, the National Science Foundation graduate research. She's a fellow working at the Pennsylvania State University. And then we have Raja Kari, a U.S. Air Force colonel. He's went to the U.S. Air Force Academy. He got a bachelor's degree in astronautical engineering and engineering science. He has a master's in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT, and he graduated from the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. Let's see, we also have Matthew Dominick, a U.S. Navy Lieutenant Commander. He's got a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering from the University of San Diego and a master's in systems engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School. He is also a graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. We have Bob Hines, a U.S. Air Force Lieutenant Colonel who has a bachelor's in aerospace engineering from Boston University. And let's see, Bob is from Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. I did want to mention Matthew Dominick's from Wheat Ridge, Colorado, and Raja Kari is from Cedar Falls, Iowa. All right, then there's Warren Hoeber from Pittsburgh. He earned a bachelor's in aeronautics and astronautics from MIT and a doctorate in electrical engineering and computer science from the University of California, Berkeley. Then we have Dr. Johnny Kim. He is a U.S. Navy lieutenant from Los Angeles. He's a U.S. Navy SEAL, and he completed more than 100 combat operations. He earned the Silver Star and the Bronze Star with combat. He earned a degree in mathematics from the University of San Diego and a doctorate of medicine from Harvard. Then we have Jasmine Mogbelly from Baldwin, New York, a U.S. Marine Corps major from, she's got a bachelor's in engineering with information technology from MIT, a master's degree in aerospace engineering from the Naval Postgraduate School, distinguished graduate of the U.S. Naval Test Pilot School. Then Laurel O'Hara from Houston, Texas, a bachelor's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Kansas, and a master's degree in aeronautics and astronautics from Purdue University. Was a research engineer at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. We have Dr. Francisco Frank Rubio from Miami. He's a U.S. Army Lieutenant Colonel, bachelor's degree in international relations at the U.S. Military Academy at West Point, a doctorate of medicine at the Uniformed Services University, Health Sciences in Bethesda, Maryland. He's a Black Hawk helicopter pilot with more than 1,100 hours, including combat and imminent danger time. Then we also have Jessica Watkins from Lafayette, Colorado, with a bachelor's degree in geological and environmental sciences from Stanford, a doctorate in geology from the University of California, Los Angeles. Also has worked at NASA's Ames Research Center and the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, JPL. So that gives you an idea of the kind of credentials and the kind of quality personnel that NASA is stocking the astronaut corps with. And of course, these new astronauts are going to be the first group that will be primarily focused on the Artemis mission, which is the Orion space capsule and the Space Launch System. And so that's pretty exciting, the SLS rocket and the Orion crew capsule. So that's the crew that'll be operating that equipment. Very exciting. Some other news with NASA astronauts is that NASA astronaut Christina Koch on board the International Space Station marked her 289th day in space last Saturday. That broke the record for the longest single space flight by a female, which previously was held by retired astronaut Peggy Whitson. Christina Koch is also known for completing the first all-female spacewalk back in October with astronaut Jessica Meir, which installed some new solar array batteries. She's scheduled to return to Earth on February 6th, which will increase her record to 328 days in space. 328 days is just 12 days shy of astronaut Mark Kelly's U.S. flight record from back in 2016. Now, the all-time record was made by Russian cosmonaut Valery Polyakov, and that was back in 1995, and that was 438 days in space. What a record. So coming up here in January, we've got some exciting events that are going to be taking place. SpaceX's next Starlink mission and the kickoff to the year 2020 is scheduled for January 3rd at 10:14 Eastern Standard Time from Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Air Force Station. This will be another 60 satellites that'll bring the total of SpaceX Starlink satellites to 180. Weather forecast for a good launch from the Space Coast does not look favorable. The forecast shows a possibility of scattered showers and isolated storms, and there is a 60% probability that the launch will be delayed due to weather. The backup launch date would fall to Saturday, January 4th. More Starlink launches are scheduled every 2 weeks after this launch, so things are really starting to ratchet up. The FCC has approved 12,000 Starlink satellites to be launched by SpaceX. Of course, SpaceX plans for 42,000 Starlink satellites to launch. 42,000. That's amazing. Well, let's see here. Then, following the Starlink SpaceX mission, is the commercial crew SpaceX Crew Dragon in-flight abort test or mission scheduled for January 11th. This will be the last big test for SpaceX before being cleared for manned missions to the International Space Station with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley. So that's very exciting. Now this in-flight abort test should be, an awesome spectacle, because they're going to launch a Falcon 9 with the Crew Dragon on top, and then in mid-flight, probably where it experiences its maximum dynamic pressure, they're going to simulate an emergency with the rocket, with the Falcon 9 rocket, and separate the Crew Dragon from the Falcon 9 rocket and rocket the Crew Dragon capsule safely away from the Falcon 9 rocket, where it's going to disintegrate and break up in midair. And this should all be, well, as you know, SpaceX and their video footage is going to be incredible. We're going to really enjoy watching that take place. So that's pretty exciting. And this in-flight abort test should be the very last test before SpaceX will be able to send astronauts into space to the International Space Station. So that's that. Of course, President Trump signed into law the creation of the Space Force, and this is the 6th branch of the U.S. Armed Forces as part of the 2020 National Defense Authorization Act. The U.S. Space Force will operate under the umbrella of the Air Force in a similar way in which the Marine Corps operates under the umbrella of the Navy. Officials have estimated a startup cost of $2 billion over 5 years and require 15,000 personnel. Air Force General Jay Raymond will take command of this new branch of the military, and this all comes just in time, especially since North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has recently promised a special Christmas present for the United States, which thankfully so far has gone unrealized. So with that, we're breaking into the year 2020, and again, I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. And there's so much to look forward to in 2020. We kept saying, it was like a broken record in 2019, as we kept saying, well, SpaceX is going to send its first astronauts or crew to the International Space Station in 2020. Boeing's going to send their first NASA astronauts to the International Space Station in 2020. Virgin Galactic was going to start its operations, its commercial operations for space tourism in 2020. Blue Origin, 2020. NASA's Mars 2020 rover is going to blast off this year. We'll also be watching the continued development of the Artemis program and the continued development of Sierra Nevada's Dream Chaser spaceplane. So these are all exciting upcoming events that we're looking forward to in 2020. We're gonna, if you'll stay with us, we're gonna cover these events and make sure that you have all the good news that's pertaining to these events. So we're looking forward to that. As far as Boeing goes, you know, they launched the CST-100 Starliner December 20th for its test mission to the International Space Station. Things didn't quite go as to planned. Something was wrong with the internal clock on the crew capsule, and that caused a error in the thrusters being fired before it was in the proper orbit, and too much propellant was used up, which made it impossible for the CST-100 Starliner to make it to the International Space Station. So they had to deorbit the capsule probably 3 or 4 days before it was due to come back. So that was a disappointing outcome for that mission. Now NASA is saying that they're thinking that they're not going to require Boeing to do a redo on that mission, even though it didn't even reach the International Space Station. We don't know how its automatic docking procedures work, if they work at all. What we do know is that the capsule was able to launch, the capsule was able to respond to commands to deorbit, and there was successful landing in the New Mexico desert. So that was all successful. But the primary mission of the primary goal of the mission to reach the International Space Station was a failure. And then, speaking of future developments for the Boeing CST-100 Starliner, SpaceX is being required to do this in-flight abort test to demonstrate that the Crew Dragon can safely carry the astronauts away from the Falcon 9 rocket in case of an emergency or anomaly. However, NASA is not requiring Boeing to do the same thing. Boeing just has to do a computer simulation of the CST-100 Starliner experiencing an anomaly and separating from the rocket, just as a simulation, a computer simulation. They're not requiring them to actually go through with the steps and procedures to launch and then simulate an emergency and safely carry the astronauts to safety. I'm not really sure why that is that Boeing keeps getting break after break after break, and these shortcuts keep happening. For example, first start off from the get-go, NASA paid Boeing twice as much as SpaceX to develop the same spacecraft. Then, as far as the second to last test, the abort test on the stand, where the CST-100 Starliner was supposed to fire up its abort engines from the crew capsule, and then one of the parachutes didn't deploy correctly. And now this, they launched their demo mission to the International Space Station, where the crew capsule didn't even reach the station. It was a complete failure. And now their in-flight abort test is not required of Boeing. For some reason, they just keep getting break after break after break. I don't know why NASA is doing that and requiring SpaceX to do so much more. Well, I think that's pretty much going to cover everything for today. We're looking forward to this launch of the Starlink satellites on Friday, and if the weather does not hold out for us, we'll be catching the footage of that launch on Saturday. So that's pretty exciting. And then the big exciting news is, hey, January 11th and the in-flight abort test of the SpaceX Crew Dragon. So stay tuned and we'll be covering that. Well, I want to thank you for joining us. And if you like this video, click like. And if you want to see more, click subscribe. And you have a terrific new year. Thanks for joining us. And that's all for now. Goodbye.